Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to Edinburgh-based parapsychologist and writer Evelyn Hollow. How are you, Evelyn?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. The reason we're talking to you today is you've recently been, I'm going to say highlighted, starred. I'm not quite sure what the word could be, but your work as a parapsychologist has been highlighted on the Battersea Poltergeist, a wonderful podcast that the BBC has recently done. And I just wanted to really, I've got so many questions to ask about the Battersea Poltergeist now. I think what has been sort of your take on the I'm going to say, I don't want to say the phenomenon of the podcast, but it seems like it went really, really well.
It did. It's been a great hit. I think we charted top 10 on the podcast charts on iTunes and things like that. Shot up to I think number 3 or number 2. We were right behind Louis Theroux's show, and then eventually I do believe we hit number 1. It's been a great success. It's been in lots of papers. It's been in Haunted magazine. You guys yourselves have done a review. It's been phenomenal, and especially just hearing individual people's responses on like Twitter. We did a Q&A for a couple of the last episodes, like a live listen along, and it was absolutely massive. We were a trending topic on Twitter, which is absolutely crazy. I think like in the first 7 minutes, my phone had something like 272 notifications. I've never been so grateful that I upgraded my phone recently. We've been inundated with emails, people's theories. But yeah, it's I can't remember the last time I saw a singular paranormal case that people were more obsessed or angry about than this case. You know, lots of theories, but also lots of frustration, and it's really unusual and quite unique as well because the person is at the center of the case, Shirley, is still alive, and that's really rare in these cases. So to be able to still talk to her, live interview her, have her on the news, and be able to talk about her experiences all the way back then is a real gift, because normally we're doing it retroactively. You know, there's nothing there, or the house is gone, or the people are dead. So yeah, it's been a real phenomenon. It's been an absolute whirlwind.
Well, that's right what you say about Shirley, that someone's actually alive, because a lot of these cases it's questionable whether things actually happen, because it's like someone said to someone that said to someone, and where you've actually got Shirley who was there. Have you actually met Shirley? Have you
I
spoken to
haven't
her?
I haven't met her in person. Of course, we were recording a lot of this during the lockdowns, so it's been really difficult. I was due to go to London along with Dr. O'Keefe and record there, and then because of the lockdowns, we ended up having to record it all remotely, which was an absolute trials and tribulations of technology. So I haven't had a chance to meet her in person, but we were both on ITV this morning together on separate segments, and Danny sort of re-interviewed her for a bonus episode and things like that. So we have been able to sort of communicate through Danny. Danny sort of asked her questions to her. But no, I'd really love to meet her in person. But yeah, just the nature of the lockdown, there was so much we were going to do. We were going to go to the Enfield house on actual Halloween and things like that, and we just couldn't. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd really hope to actually get to meet her in person one day, because if nothing else, I think she's incredibly brave for being, I think in her 70s now, and she's had to come back and talk about this and be analysed by all these people on Twitter and the internet and stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's completely changed her life. So yeah, no, I really look forward to getting to meet her in person.
I think having listened to the documentary, or call it a documentary or docudrama, however we want to call it, it must have been a terrible time for her, because, I mean, I think with some things, I always think, I wouldn't mind a ghost in my house. I mean, I think that'd be quite fun. But I don't think anyone in their right mind would a poltergeist anywhere near them, would they?
No, I think there's a lot of people always forget this as well, especially you see on Twitter, and people are throwing out all these insane theories and saying, oh, it was Shirley the whole time and things like that. Regardless of whether you believe in the phenomena or not, Shirley still had to live through having the house destroyed, having the house rattled so much that it sounded like the Blitz. Neighbours were out in the street. The fire brigade was called. She lost her job because of it. Her grandmother died basically directly because of it. Her dad had to leave work. She had to live through all of that, and it went on for like 12 years, which is, as far as I know, the longest running poltergeist case in history. So to live through all of that phenomena, sleep deprivation every night, having your life destroyed, not able to leave the house without reporters swarming on you, things like that, is an incredibly traumatic experience. So for Shirley to have her life analysed and ripped apart, for no monetary gain at all, she was never paid for anything or anything like that, and then to come back in her 70s and have it all happen again is just incredible. Yeah, I think people think, they just forget that there was real people at the centre of this case, and this really did happen to them. It's not a theoretical thing, it's not a movie. These people lived through these horrors. They were absolutely petrified out of their mind.
Yeah, I think as you say, everyone's got an opinion of this, and I've been ranting about this, privately over the time, because there's different things happen during the Battersea Poltergeist case, and I'm listening to your podcasts and I'm agreeing with this bit and I'm hating this bit, as we all are. And I think I was a little bit, I actually I thought it was quite a balanced type of podcast. I think sometimes it gets a bit silly, but I think because you had like 8 episodes and then the 9th episode you were able to weigh up a lot of things. Had you done much with Poltergeist before you came to this podcast?
Not poltergeist specifically. So originally I worked as an academic when I was lecturing and also studying. I focused more on the sort of cognitive effects of paranormal belief. So what's happening in the brain during paranormal belief. And then outside of that field, I mostly work in the more historical, sort of anthropological side, so kind of folklore and history of the paranormal, especially here in Scotland, the paranormal capital of the world. And so I have come across poltergeist cases before, and I've written about them or researched them or consulted on them, but not in this way, where we had such a huge case spanning 12 years. There's people still alive. We had people from every single walk of life involved in them as well. You had everybody from reporters to policemen to fire brigade to one of Britain's like most respected legendary BBC broadcasters. You had people who were friends, people that had nothing to do with the house. It was everywhere. It was every sort of background and belief and everything. It was an incredibly complex case, and also just the level of phenomena as well. It wasn't just regular, there is stages to a poltergeist case, and this one had them all and then some. And also the phenomena not being localized to a house. So it's not a poltergeist case in that it's a house with a poltergeist. The phenomena happened outside of the house as well. It followed Shirley around. It happened to people when Shirley wasn't there as well. So phenomena moving around and happening all over the place is just absolutely insane. It is the crown jewel of poltergeist cases. And they found me. It was kind of by fluke. I got an email from Danny saying, "Oh, we're doing this show. It's about a poltergeist case from the 50s. We found your website. You're a parapsychologist. We'd like to hire you potentially to sort of consult and chat on the show and investigate the case." And then going in and digging through the case, I was like, "Holy cow, this is absolutely insane." And the more we got into it, the harder it became. Like, we would sort of think we'd solved one thing, and then next week Danny would come back and he'd found a bunch of neighbours who were there around the time who'd seen other phenomena. And then when you get to like the bonus episode, there's people who heard the show and then their sisters worked where Shirley worked, and then they went and asked them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember that, like the scissors flying through the air and stuff." And it's just like the closer you got to it, the less you saw. It was an absolutely incredible case. Yeah, I've never worked on anything that's been that complex or that big, definitely, as this case. So it was it was a real honour. It's probably going to be a career highlight working on that case.
I noticed at the very end when they were doing the credits, and Alan Murdy, who's the president of the Ghost Club, was one of the consultants, and I've spoken to him about them, not necessarily at Battersea, but at the Ghost Club. I think he's presented on it, and James Clark, who wrote the book with Shirley Hitchings, has written for the Spooky Isles as well. I remember Alan saying that with Poltergeist, and we was talking about Enfield at the time because Enfield's the one that everyone talks about. He was saying that with these cases, you've got more eyewitnesses to them than some murder cases where people have been hanged. So
Right.
you've got more you've got more evidence for the Enfield poltergeist. I think they talk about the burden of proof. That if this was a court case, you've got the burden of proof. You've got dozens of people that have said something's happened, but yet people are not prepared to believe it. What do you believe? What do you? I mean, I personally sort of get to the point when you did the part of the investigation where you checked the handwriting and it came that it was supposedly Shirley had written it. Now, I believe that she didn't know that she believed that she did it, so I don't believe there's any fraud in this at all. I think whatever happened. But what do you think was happening in the thing?
So to me, this case is, like you're saying, with the burden of proof. To me, this case is definitively paranormal. We were able to rule out, environmental causes, like we ruled out, the house and things like that. So we're able to rule that out. You've also got phenomena happening outside of the house, so that again rules that out. People think it was Shirley faking it, but then it would happen when Shirley wasn't even there. It would happen when there was 12 people in the room staring right at Shirley, and the noises are, moving around, they're in the ceiling and things like that. So unless Shirley can turn invisible, which is even more incredible than it being a poltergeist, it's not possible. And then you had people being like, well, it's the brother, but then again, the brother's in the room accounted for, and how we're not just talking about normal, taps and bangs. We're talking about phenomena so loud and so huge that the house shook, that neighbours were out in the street at 3 a.m. thinking that they were ripping up the floorboards, that the police were called. You had the fire brigade saying that they couldn't find out where the fire came from. The level of phenomena, and then you had, there's a point where we found out in a bonus episode where people had visited the house and Shirley had begun to be pulled off of, I think it was a futon, and 3 or 4 big strapping grown men were hanging onto her and they couldn't pull her back down. Not even unless you were Penn and Teller grade gifted were you able to fake that. So when we talk about the burden of proof and the level in this case, to me it is definitively paranormal. And trying to ascertain, and then it becomes difficult because as the case develops, you've got Chib involved, the investigator, and he believes that the poltergeist is the lost dauphin of France and things like that. But poltergeists are known to, be sort of almost like trickster spirits, and things also get convoluted and things are moving past. But there's also human error as well, because humans are taking down the notes, they're transcribing them. So you have human error. It becomes a bit like Chinese whispers. So there is, I don't believe that, I do believe it's paranormal, and I do believe it's a poltergeist. I don't believe it was the lost dauphin of France, although we've now got mixed things for that. I don't really believe that it was that. I definitely don't believe it's the brother. We then also found out in the bonus, everybody was obsessed with the fact that it was the brother, because that's Kieran's theory. And everybody skeptics were staunchly like, it's the brother, just because we didn't know enough about him. And then we found out recently that actually about halfway through the case, if you like, he moved to Australia or something, or he moved elsewhere. So he wasn't even in the country. So to me, it's not human. It cannot be human. So from whatever angle you come at it, it's definitely, I believe it's a poltergeist. I don't believe it's the lost dauphin of France. And I'm not sure about the handwriting, because like you said, if it is Shirley, I'm also not convinced. But if it is Shirley's there consciously, or it's not happening consciously to her, so it could be automatic writing. But then you've also got to look at other people being involved in the case mistranslating things, because the case went on for so long. It would actually be weirder if somebody hadn't embellished on it, because that happened in Enfield. The kids were so desperate to get people to believe them, they started embellishing on the phenomena. It's pretty obvious when someone's embellishing, and when it's more core, more central, more refutable. And to me, it would actually be weirder if the case went for 12 years and someone didn't try to embellish on it, because that's human. So to me, I do definitely believe it is a poltergeist. I do definitely believe it was attached to Shirley, not the house or anyone else. And trying to ascertain where it came from, though, we keep asking ourselves, why Shirley? So that's kind of the hard part, is why Shirley? Why was it drawn to her? But to me, it's definitively paranormal in nature. And I always say to people, for me, it's not are ghosts real, it's what are ghosts. So my job is to work out, whether it's through physics, chemistry, psychology, sociology, whatever version of science, to work out what ghosts are, not are they real. I think at this point, if when you go through these cases, especially like this one in Battersea, if you could have that much evidence put in front of you and still be like, no, it's definitely someone else, I'm like, well, then they must be Moriarty grade intelligent to have been able to fake that phenomena and everything else through 12 years and convince hundreds of people. And that's more impressive than it being a poltergeist itself. So yeah, to me, it's definitely paranormal in nature, and it's just trying to ascertain how that works in terms of science or otherwise.
It always amuses me when you have these sort of skeptics that that come in and say, well, it's this, but there's just so much to this case. You can't write off every little bit. Yes, there was probably a little bit of embellishing, or little kids doing stuff, like especially in Enfield, there was bits where they were clearly playing around, but the other parts there weren't. And I think that's the case here. You might have bits like Chib doing this sort of what I thought was silly, the Dauphin stuff. I just think is grasping at straws, and but that doesn't mean the rest of it is rubbish. Just because one bit's rubbish doesn't mean the rest is. And
You're like, there's no not a fan, but then how did the house shake every night so much that neighbours were out in the street thinking it was going to be ripped up? There was writing on the ceiling that was written in one continuous stroke, and the ceiling is so tall that for a person to write that, they would have to get up on a ladder, which means you can only reach so far, and then you have to get a ladder and move it and do it again. It's not physically possible for any human being to have written it, and that was there. We're talking about dozens of witnesses, and the place where Shirley walked, and and the fire, and just everything else. And I mean, when everybody who it could possibly be like in the family is accounted for in the room, bearing in mind that Ethel is very old and very like quite walks with a stick, and her mum's quite severely disabled as well, and things like that. So once you've got everyone in the room that it could possibly be, and there's a whole room full of reporters, investigators, police, whatever, and everyone's watching each other, and phenomena is like happening, it's moving around, it's under your head, it's in the pillowcase, and they're like, no, it must just still be there. And I'm like, it must just still be what? It must just still be what? Because that explanation must be more fantastical than ghosts. I think at this point, ghosts and things to me are not fantastical. Like, that is the logical, like, is it the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle quote that's like, once you've ruled out the improbable, whatever remains, no matter how impossible, must be true, or some variation of that. So
and I think it's little things, and the whole toe clicking was absurd to me. Like,
nonsense.
Even click, like, that's me clicking my fingers. If she could click her toes as loud as that, that's still not very loud.
There's a doctor, a GP, a former GP who I know of, who is now in paranormal sort of work or writes as a keen interest in. And he's an actual GP. And the first time I spoke to him about the show, he was like, "I'll tell you right now, I am a GP. First of all, a hammer toe has nothing to do with clicking. It's actually to do with the shape of the toe. And second of all, he's like, that's not possible. My dad has this thing where he sort of like crunches his toes in his boots. And it is fairly loud, but no more than like that is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? No, that's not like, house shattering, like her grandmother says, it's like the Blitz, grade, like whatever, like doing that. And also you can hear where that comes from as well. So if I'm doing that in a room, I can't throw that to then suddenly be in the ceiling or the wall or in the table or in the cabinet or under your leg. Like, that's not possible.
I always wonder whether it's just people being dismissive of the working class. Like, if this had happened in anywhere else other than South London in the 1950s, would people have given it more credence?
Yeah, that's a good point. I come back to this a lot about like areas of classicism, and also your classicism, racism, and like westernization a lot in paranormal, because we hear things and then we go. People have this attitude of like, oh, I can explain it away with like science, because there's this attitude of science for the enlightened white people of the first world, and religious beliefs or paranormal beliefs or spiritual beliefs are for the for the savages. That is very much still like an imperialist mindset. And that feeds into classism as well, where you're right. If this had happened in a townhouse on George Street in Edinburgh, that's like 1.2 mil to a family of very well-to-do lawyers and things like that, people would have been like, that's really serious, because they put weight and credence on people's professions and things like that as well. But because it just happened in a very working class, quite crowded, like you're saying, townhouse, Wally was a train driver, mum was disabled, things like that, very working class London, people were like, oh, it's attention seeking, or like they write it off. We definitely add attribution to class, to working class. And we write these sort of stories off, as being fantastical, or people are stupid. They're fooled. They're stupid because you think you're smarter than they are because they're working class.
But I mean, if you've got all the people in the street saying something's coming on, they're not likely to just come out because someone's clicking their fingers, or
no.
It's just sense. Yes, they hear screaming all the time, and you hear that everywhere you live, cars going past and stuff like that. But they're just we don't trust those people. They're idiots out there. They think there's something else going on.
Yeah, there's definitely like this kind of attitude of like only fools believe, like they're not educated enough, so they don't know any better. And I'll tell you, I'm from a lower working class family. I grew up in a one and a bit bedroomed house. I slept in the same bed as my sister till I was 19 years old, and I grew up on a sort of caravan park in the borders outside of there. But I also happen to have a first class bachelor's degree and a master's degree with research. Consider myself pretty well read, amongst other things, and I've still come into that belief. So this attitude of like, oh, they're just not like, if they knew better, they'd like know where it was. Okay, well, I have a master's degree in scientific research, and this is still what I believe what it is. We do this thing where we kind of write off I don't know if it's people like to think feel better or feel more superior. There's this attitude of like, oh, I'm too smart to believe in like the paranormal. I'm like, okay, well, if you don't believe in the paranormal, I'll take you to a house that's got a history of being severely haunted, like Enfield or anything like that. You'll go in the dark and you watch them go, absolutely not. But if you don't believe in anything, then surely it's fine. It's always incredible how many people are vehemently, I am better than paranormal belief, rather than treating it as the greatest frontier of science to explore this. And it's amazing how fast people's attitude change when you ask them to go into any like creepy old castle in the dark or whatever, and suddenly they're frightened. I'm like, but you're logical and you're better than me, so surely you shouldn't be frightened. Which people's attitudes change very quickly.
I've got I can't see it there, but I've got the annual report for the Society of Psychical Research back there. And those people are doctors and, professors and all sorts of things. And you wouldn't call any of them stupid by 1,000 years. But, they're
So
interested
many
in this kind of thing.
so many people that I've spoken to since Battersea are like retired physicists, and also if you look at some of the books like uh, Margins of Reality, Quantum Enigma are two of my favourite books, and those so there's a book called Margins of Reality, and in it the two scientists who wrote it talk about consciousness and the paranormal and sort of the frontier of where those two things interface. They were top aerospace engineers at Princeton University. These are people who are not just scientists, these are head of their field, like cutting edge grade scientists, joined physicists and things. And even some of the greatest physicists of our time, Bell, Schrodinger, everybody else, all had papers written on like the paranormal and being interested in it. These people are like some of the best scientists the human race has ever known, and they're increasingly keen in the paranormal. And once they start to whittle it down, they hit a point where they can't explain, and then we have to start expanding our knowledge of science. So yeah, I don't think like Jerry from the pub, if he thinks he's smarter than like two Princeton grade, scientists, then he can be my guest. But there's
Yeah. I mean, I obviously don't think that they all believe that what it is, but they know what it is, but they're open to the idea that it's not just some underwater, or
pipes or
pipes
whatever.
or something because they could check that out very, very quickly, and that would have been sorted in the first 3 days of it. It wouldn't have gone for 12 years if it was just a bit of battering around. Now, we're talking about that, and about, how you're the fact you've got a master's and all this kind of stuff. How did you get to the point where you wanted to study this as opposed to sitting eating popcorn watching Most Haunted on the telly?
Well, first of all, I would never watch Most Haunted. The No, so I originally went to university and I did a bachelor's in psychology, and at the time I specialised in forensic psychology. So I went on to work for Dr. Jamal Mansour as an experimental forensic psychology research assistant, which is like they'll never fit that on the side of a bus grade job description, and mostly working on forensics. So Viper, we helped design like the Viper lineup, and friendly fire and other sort of forensic identity, trying to improve how we actually catch people and making sure that the police are doing the right thing when we identify witnesses. So eyewitness identification, and did pretty well in that, and always had a really, really keen interest in quantum physics since I was a kid, much to the chagrin of my parents trying to explain stuff to me. And so when we started learning about like consciousness and things, and then that sort of tying in with physics, to me in my head, like consciousness and physics were like the same thing. And I had a great lecturer called Stuart Wilson, who lectured mostly stats, consciousness, physics, things like that. And when we got into it and further into it, I was in like third year and I lived with my grandparents at the time, and I came home one night and I've got this big monumental whiteboard, and I stood in front of the whiteboard and I was up all night because in my brain it clicked that anomalous phenomena, consciousness, quantum physics, all of this was all tied together. And I was like, I think it was like 1920 at the time, and I started sort of working on it. And then I started writing papers about consciousness and whatnot, getting into it, but I was really interested in anomalous phenomena. And I went to speak to Stuart about it when I was coming up to my fourth year sort of specialisation in my dissertation, and it turned out that he was actually a parapsychologist. So he had gone to Edinburgh Uni and had got his PhD from there, and that was what he used to specialise in before. And I was like, I didn't even know that was an area of psychology. So I went away and looked at it, and then I went and spoke to another person about it, and another lecturer outright told me that I'd commit career suicide because I was like a really high achieving like stats and forensics student. I was on a really good kind of career path to do well, and I was suddenly like, I'm going to swap and specialise in parapsychology, and they were like, you've lost your mind. Um, but to me, I didn't want to lie awake in bed every single night and wonder about all these unsolved things. And consciousness is still to this day considered the last great unsolved thing in psychology. It would change every part of science as how we know it. So I decided to do my dissertation in that. I specialised, and then I was luckily able to come back to QMU and do my master's in research. And it's kind of a blank check degree. As long as you can get someone to supervise it, you can specialise in it. So Stuart was able to specialise me again. And I kind of ended up with it from there. And the more I dug into it, the more questions I had. And I've always, been a writer and written lots of things. And I'm constantly working like 5 jobs at once. I was doing private tours in Edinburgh and things, and paranormal history and whatnot. And infinite, bartending and everything else. And the more I kind of dug into it, I just kept coming back with more questions. But at no point did I ever feel like I was on the wrong track. I always felt like I was getting closer to the truth. And then Danny, I guess, found me like through my website, and the rest is kind of to history. But it is an incredibly niche area, and it's very difficult to get into because you have to get someone else who's already qualified to supervise you, and it's a bit of a mess. Edinburgh University, I went to QMU, but Edinburgh University is actually one of the few universities in the UK that you can actually do, I think, your PhD in parapsychology. They have a whole unit for parapsychology. It's a very difficult area to get into, but to me, it is like the most forgotten about or written off area. But to me, it is asking all the big questions, like, questions about particles and physics that we're not quite near there. Questions about entanglement, questions about time, questions about consciousness, all of this together, along with like the human psyche and the kind of history, and it's tying it all together. So to me, it is it's the most incredible discipline. It's also the least boring discipline you could probably ever do. But to me, it is the only discipline asking the absolute biggest questions, and yeah, it's a discipline that constantly gets written off. But yeah, I have no regrets. If this is career suicide, then I'm absolutely fine with that.
What have you, from the time that you started this sort of journey, when you thought, well, there is an actual job role called parapsychology or paranormal psychology? What have you learned? Have you actually discovered anything yet? You thought, other than that moment when you saw your whiteboard and you go, oh, this all starts to fit together.
So we've there has been so far all the sort of things I thought about when I was like younger, standing at that whiteboard, we've actually started to prove. So one of the main things was trying to work out, what Einstein used to call spooky action at a distance. So we're looking at sort of like entanglement, how things across vast distances are able to interact at the same time, and it looks like magic because you're like, there's nothing connecting them, that's not possible. So other scientists, now other research institutes have started to prove that. And then the other sort of great frontier was consciousness. Now, to me, I always believed that consciousness is molecular, which was kind of controversial. And now we've actually started to show through experiments, through actual physical experiments, mostly involving, we're starting small, so you're looking at like caterpillars, butterflies, that sort of thing. Show that it is potentially molecular. So every idea I had when I was 19 that I couldn't get within 10 feet of because I don't have $1 million in a research lab has slowly started to be proven right. So we are getting closer to it. And I think in my own like academic work and own research, we really started to look at where does paranormal, what's happening in the brain physically, neurobiologically, when people endorse paranormal belief, like where does that actually come from? And you can also look at how that can be manipulated as well, because it's good to know how people are able to fake it as well as like what is real. So being able to know, like, if we ask people a set of questions, but if we change the temperature in the room or we create a priming thing, are they more likely to endorse paranormal belief than not? So we looked at that because you kind of have to be aware of having a background in forensics is useful as well, because you've got to look at like how people interact with each other, like eyewitness statements, and is it that somebody thought they saw something, they said it, and now every single person in the room has reported that they've seen it too, but what did they actually see? So it's good to be able to sort of work backwards, because the point of science is not to prove things, it's to disprove things. So our job is not to go out with a list and be like, it's that. It's to go out with a list and be like, it's not that, it's not that, and it's not that, and whittle our way down. So most of my academic work is trying to rule out, like, okay, what causes people to endorse paranormal belief when it's not actually happening, so that we can rule out when that is happening. But yeah, I think definitely as we've gone on, all the sort of ideas I had when I was younger have started to, in much more expensive laboratories and things across the world, starting to be proved correct. And I think we're getting really ambitiously close to being able to understand all these things that look like bizarre magic and things like that are not. It's just physics being really weird. But that doesn't stop it from being paranormal. And then we've got to really look at how does paranormal or intuitive sort of transpersonal beliefs interact with the actual physical world? Like, how do those things influence each other? But yeah, I think the next 10 years are going to be really interesting for science, really interesting.
With that is obviously a little bit more deep than you're ever going to get on any kind of paranormal TV show, which a lot of the people, and it's probably a lot more deep than we've ever gone on with the Spooky Owls. But how do you think that relates to? I mean, I feel like I'm sound like a dummy now, but how does it relate to what most people would appreciate paranormal investigation? Because obviously that's very much in a laboratory and is the science part of it. What do you think of the sort of your run of the mill? I'll say run of the mill now because I'm feeling like a real dunce at the moment. The paranormal investigations that are sort of what people watching this would expect. Like, what do you think of that? Do you think it's even worthwhile going out with a flashlight with your mates with an EVP or something like that and search for ghosties?
I do think it's worthwhile, and I'd always encourage people who are interested to go and explore the paranormal and to have their own experiences, because you meet so many people who are skeptic but curious, and then they have an experience and it alters them forever. I have mixed feelings. I definitely encourage it. It's definitely something that I grew up, doing. Probably going to places that you shouldn't have done with torchlights, in an EMF reader or whatever, and doing things like that. And I definitely encourage people to have those experiences, if nothing else, then just to also learn the history, because I'm a very keen, historian, and especially in Scotland, our folklore. So to actually learn about the history of like abandoned buildings and things like that, I would always encourage that. The only issue I have with it is that there's an ethics principle where we sometimes get people who don't really know what they're doing going in and like destroying property, or had issues with people going into places with really high, say, historically reported phenomena, and then like egging on whatever might be there. So say it's poltergeist to like injure people and things like that, and like that is so dangerous. Not just if the phenomena is there and that happens, but also because we've seen in other historical psychological experiments that when you create a group of people and you create an atmosphere and you create this like in-group out-group behavior, so like when you feel like you're part of a group versus when you feel like you're out of a group, and you get this like do you ever see people behave in crowds? Do you know, like herd behavior?
Yeah.
And they kind of egg each other on, and then it becomes something, and then people they behave in a way they wouldn't normally, so it can become really
So
dangerous.
the mob mentality.
Yeah, so mob mentality, people get sucked into it, so that's dangerous. And then you've also got, yeah, it's just a case of trying to be ethical at the same time. I definitely encourage people to do it. I just wish people would maybe think a wee bit more about like what they're doing. The great thing now with the internet is you can go onto YouTube, or you can go through Twitter, and like you can read articles and things like that. So you can educate yourself. Just reading. It's you if you've got access to it, read it online and get an idea of maybe what you should be doing, shouldn't be doing, things you should check. Also to just be prepared physically. If you're going to abandoned buildings, be safe, and make sure you've got equipment with you, make sure you've got signal or walkie-talkies, make sure someone knows where you are. But yeah, to me it's more just like an ethical problem where people go in, and I love that people go in and explore. I'm very wary of people on YouTube who are like doing it purely for viral. They're completely disrespectful to those of us who actually work in the industry, but also disrespectful to their environment and other people around them, and they constantly just go in and they want to like jump out and scare people or create a video that goes viral, and they're going to end up injuring themselves, injuring someone else, destroying property, and they also make us look like idiots, because then people are like, paranormal psychologists, what is that like? Do you go in and be like, oh, there's a ghost? And I'm like, that's absolutely not what I do at all. So it's just, yeah, I encourage it and I love it. And it's entertaining, if nothing else. It's really good fun, and I love learning the history of it. I love that people are interested in it and are passionate about it. But I also really want people to be mindful of what they're doing ethically to their environment and to the people that they're with, and making sure that they're safe. Because I don't want anybody to get hurt because they thought it would be cool to break into like an abandoned mental asylum in the middle of the night. Someone falls from a floorboard and kills themselves. That's not okay. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it, but I just want people to be like mindful of it ethically as well.
Yeah, I don't think we'd ever encourage people to be doing anything that's criminal anyway.
No,
So I think, I mean, and I can appreciate that when I talk about going out at night with your flashlight, I'm talking about with doing it properly, like
yeah, of course. No, 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 I know,
in
yeah,
a pub that's organised with
yeah,
your
of
friends or
course,
something like that. Because I think
yeah.
over the lockdown, you've seen a lot of videos where people are going out investigating things at night, and you just know that they're not supposed to be there, and that's not a real
Yeah.
good thing. And I just think some of it's quite rubbish. You seem to have you're obviously a parapsychologist, but you seem to have I don't want to use the word goth, but maybe you might use the word goth.
Yeah, I'm goth.
Back,
Goth cowboy is my aesthetic. Yeah, I'm
are
goth
you
as
a
hell.
goth cowboy? Are you?
Yeah,
So
I'm goth.
okay. Okay, so I've been reading your website, and you do a bit of fiction, and you've got some non-fiction articles. Really love to talk to you, and I mean, we'll finish you with this because I mean, we are the Spooky Isles, and we do ghostly things, but we also love all the other craziness that comes with horror and dark history. Tell us your theories about lunacy and the Transylvania effect. Can you enlighten us? Because people can. I'll put a link to your website on here, and people can read about it. We all know that things go a bit weirder on a full moon. What's your thoughts about that?
So initially, that is a really well known, and sort of where you always hear people say, "Oh, it's a full moon out tonight," and when you start to look into where that actually comes from. So people believe that human beings and animals and things behave differently when there's a full moon. So initially there was this sort of theory that to be fair, when you go right the way back through history, you look at sort of like folklore, right the way back through paganism, through Egypt, through everything, you can go all the way back. The moon's always had an important spiritual effect. And it's always been, worshipped or revered. So it sort of trickles down through that. And then we came into the scientific point where people believed that because the moon controls the tides, people thought it was to do with the water content in your body, that the moon, was creating like an inertia effect. And then other people thought that maybe it was like a conditioning, like a social thing, where maybe there was a full moon somehow triggered some sort of psychological thing. But when you actually, so it's Transylvania effect, or and then you have like the lycanthropy effect. So when you talk about werewolves transforming under the full moon. So there's a lot going on. When you look at it through the literature in terms of psychology, in peer-reviewed journals, you'll find that when we analyse a couple of things, so admissions to hospitals, things to do with like police reports or like crime levels, other things like psychiatric inpatient and things like that. Lots of studies done longitudinally. That just means that they've been done over a long period of time with lots of people involved to make it as thorough and valid as possible and accurate as possible. They actually found that there was no increase really above normal, give or take. So most of it is probably just a conditioned belief that it's a residual thing that we hang on to. That being said, I worked in bars for years, and I am telling you that when there is a full moon, people behave batshit crazy.
I
And
used
there
to
is
work. I used to work in a
something about it.
newspaper. I used to work in a newspaper, and I would actually do police reporting. And you'd know when there was something, because the cops would say it to you. And it's interesting you say that there's no extra over a period of time. It may not be. I just wonder whether it's more light outside, so people go out more. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's hard to do because there's so many different sort of compounding like effects. It's hard to rule out. I mean, just so people just believe that people somehow act out, or are more disinhibited or more not themselves or whatever else during it. But yeah, it's weird. I know when I was lecturing at QMU, one of the classes that I used to teach to first or second years was like research methodology, and we would use pseudoscientific things to get them to analyse them. And I had kids write papers on the lunar lunacy or the Transylvania effect. So we know that, like in the literature, that it doesn't happen. But I still struggle with trying to convince myself that it's not a thing that happens, because every single time I've worked in a bar, it doesn't have to be like on a Friday night. It could be like a random Tuesday night. There's nothing really on. It could be like, I don't know, early March or whatever. There's no like football on or anything like that. And you would just get a string of really bizarre, like intense, weird stuff, like worse than normal happening. And I guarantee you, like I'll be down in the kitchen, and the kitchen staff will be like, "Can somebody Google whether or not it's a full moon tonight?" And it will be every single time. Like
yeah.
I don't know. It's trying to, like, you're like, as a scientist, you're like, I know that's not a thing, but as a person who's worked in anything that interacts with people's behavior, like that's a thing.
So, but do you have any idea what it is, though? I mean, is it just we've been told it, so therefore we feel it, but there's nothing really there?
I mean, I don't know, because humans have got kind of a weird relationship with the weather. Obviously, like you see when it's sunny, it doesn't have to be like blazing hot sunshine. Even when it's like a nice day, obviously everyone is out. But then you also see increases in misbehaviour because people go day drinking and stuff earlier. They go to the park and they drink earlier, right? So people get on it earlier, so that's a problem. But then you also see You know, like you'll also see in the snow a different type of behaviour and things like that. So people do have, you know, you have seasonal affective disorders to do with the light and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, it would be my best guess, probably not scientific, but my best guess would be that it's something to maybe do with the light, because we have that with seasonal affective disorder. I don't know
Yeah.
if it triggers something in the brain, or if it's like a weather thing where people see a full moon and they're like, "Oh, it's a full moon tonight," and that triggers the thing in their brain that's like, "I'm going to be bad." Like I don't know where that comes from.
It's more interesting that you say that there's actually no statistical evidence to say it's any more on that night than it is another night. So that to
Yeah,
me is the most weirdest part of it.
yeah. I mean, well, there's still more studies to do, because you always have to look at, when you're looking at a study in stats, you've always got to look at, okay, well, actually, how many people did they test? Like, where did they test it? Because it might be only in Essex, you know, or only in
Yeah.
Newcastle, or only in, you know,
Yeah.
Arbroath. So you have to look at where as well. So, you know, they are ongoing, but there has been most of them done, and most of them have relatively, as far as we know, come back that really statistically significantly anyway. So in terms of p-values, it's really no more than any other one. But yeah, I would love for somebody to do a really big longitudinal study, like across 10 years or something, and look at all the different intakes in like different cities in the world, because but then trying to get the funding for that, be like, what are we going to study, whether people are really weird at a full moon across like 10 different cities. I don't know if they give you funding for that, but
Don't know. I would have thought it'd just be crime statistics, and you could just probably find them and just check
you should be able
just
to
check every full moon and just see what it
like
is. But
link them up. But then yeah, I guess is it always crime, but that's only crime that's reported, because how many times do you go out in the street and people are just being like weird or loud, or there's just someone really creepy or something
yeah.
strange happens, and that's not reported through crime, that's just something that happens. So it's hard to gauge the level of phenomena, I guess.
Well, that's what we've got you here for anyway, to get funding and do some investigations. Well, thank you for that, Evelyn. That's been really nice to talk to you today. I could probably still talk to you for another 40 odd minutes, 100, for the rest of the night, talk about Battersea Poltergeist, and I think I showed a little bit of discipline trying to get off that subject, because I could just talk about that for hours. But anyway.
Yeah.
Once again, we look forward to seeing what happens with you next. Have you got something, anything interesting coming up soon? Now that we're about to hopefully get out of lockdown, or at least less lockdown.
Less lockdown. Yeah, I've been offered 3 or 4 different television shows. Couple for Discovery Plus, one for BBC Scotland, one for the channel Really on Sky. So we're still sort of, you know, navigating what's going to happen with that. There's also the BBC loved the Battersea Poltergeist so much that they've, I think, you know, there's discussions about doing another season, if you like. Not obviously Battersea, you know,
Yep.
anthology wise. So there's discussion about that, but yeah, there's a string of TV shows lined up. So people will probably be sick of seeing my face in the next year or so, unfortunately.
Well, even if it's just it's not just the podcast, but that'd be really exciting if there's another BBC podcast on something else, because I think they're really onto something there. I think it was a kind of weird sort of detective type story that everyone was really able to get gripped into, and you and Kieran O'Keefe there giving us sort of a professional opinions was really quite entertaining and informative. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and look forward to maybe talking to you again sometime once you get a couple more investigations under your belt, like the BBC thing, or maybe some of your TV shows.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been really great to talk to you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.